Father Murr.
Robert, good evening or good morning or whatever it is by you. Good whatever it is.
Thank you. We are talking on May 30th, 2023, and we're discussing something that had its anniversary yesterday, May 29th, and the year was 1453. So that was 570 years ago. In 1453, on May 29th, the city of Constantinople, the capital of the Roman Empire, fell on May 29th. And we're going to talk about the meaning of that for our history. And the first thing that we can say about it is that it brought a definitive end to the Roman Empire, which fell in the West already in 476, but continued in the East for another 1,000 years in Byzantium, in Constantinople. The West, of all the misconceptions and misunderstandings of history in the Western mind, is the complete lack of understanding that the civilization of the region around Constantinople continued for another 1,000 years at a high level, while the civilization and the culture in the West collapsed completely into what we call, in a shorthand way, the Dark Ages. 1453, May 29th, Constantinople fell. Do you have any preliminary remarks to make, or would you like me to continue?
I'd like you to continue. The only thing that I can say to begin with is that the history of the world changed with it.
Yeah.
It really did. It really did. But go on.
Okay. The reason that we are focusing on Constantinople is that it is the hinge point between the Eastern and Western worlds. And here we have a map, which, occasionally we have to look at the map to get a better understanding of where we are. And almost in the center of this map is the Black Sea. And on the southern shore of the Black Sea, that's where Jason and the Argonauts traveled in ancient Greece to get the golden fleece, over there in the right corner of the Black Sea. Below that is Turkey, but it was for the last few hundred years the Ottoman Empire, which is the empire that was created with the conquest of Byzantium in 1453. Our famous city of Rome is over there on that peninsula, which looks like a boot. That's Italy. And with the heel of Italy in Apulia, and the toe in Sicily and Calabria, and Rome there halfway up of Italy, and Rome in the center of the Mediterranean Sea created a world around the Mediterranean Sea. That's an essential thing to remember about Rome. The sea for Rome was more of a transport than an obstacle. And the obstacle for Rome were the Alp mountains and the difficult forests and pathways into the heart of Europe. Right here we have a map which gives us both Old Rome and New Rome. Old Rome on the left, New Rome on the right, more or less 2/3 away across the screen. At the southern part of that Black Sea, which has Istanbul, that was Constantinople. That was officially inaugurated in 330 AD by the Emperor Constantine. It was already being built in the 320s. And the Council of Nicaea, which is a small city next to Constantinople, was held in 325 AD, even before Constantinople existed. It was officially inaugurated in 330 AD. We're circling Constantinople there. It's right on the straits that bring the Black Sea down into the Mediterranean. So that whole world, which is so much in our news now, which is Ukraine, which is the northern side of the Black Sea, Crimea, you can see, and above that, Russia, All of that territory is the world that opened up or was protected against by the Black Sea, with Constantinople right at the Dardanelles, the sea passage there on that isthmus. And we call it, strangely enough, the border between Asia and Europe. So, right where Constantinople was created, we call that the border between Asia and Europe. Everything on the left side is Europe, and we call Asia Minor that big landmass to the right of Constantinople, which is modern day Turkey. And everything beyond that we call Asia. And
A great geopolitical move on Constantine's part
right,
for communication and for trade, for
yep,
everything, in the center of everything. Yep.
absolutely. And what we have to remember, if we think deeply about our faith and the Christian faith, we recognize we have three cities from which we draw our source, our root, our cultural and historical beginning. And the first is Jerusalem, of course, and the Hebrew people, Israel, the whole story that's told in the Old Testament leading up to Jesus, who was born a Jew to a Jewish mother. All of that with the Jewish prophets, their understanding of justice, their call for justice, their speaking of God as a God of justice. All of that is a constituent element, a fundamental element of the Christian worldview. The second city is Athens, because Athens was the leading intellectual city of the period from about 700 or 600 up until through the time of Alexander the Great, around 300 BC. 600 BC was the early Greek philosophers. 400s were when Socrates and then Plato and then Aristotle lived in Athens. Socrates was the teacher of Plato, and Plato was the teacher of Aristotle. And this tradition of teaching and of learning was from Athens, which is where all those islands are on the left side of the screen there, the Peloponnese down at the bottom, down to Crete, and the peninsula of Attica. And Athens was famous for philosophy, that is, love of wisdom. The word philo means love, Sophia means wisdom, philosophy means love of wisdom. And that Greek culture was carried first in about 300, a little before 300 BC, by Alexander the Great. When he went to the east, he conquered Asia Minor, that area in the screen there, and he went on all the way to Pakistan and India. Unbelievable. And he came back and he also conquered Egypt. So that whole sort of near Asian world was conquered by the son of Philip of Macedon, Alexander the Great, and brought Greek culture to that region. And in that movement of the Greeks into the east, they encountered also the Jews and the Israelites. And Palestine fell, in a sense, under Greek cultural sway. And the famous thing about the Greeks was their focus on the great universals in their philosophy.
Robert, we had when I was in Rome, we had a professor of introduction to philosophy, Father De Vos of Belgium, brilliant man. He said, "You've all heard different theories of evolution, how old the world is. Some say it's 1,000,000 years old. Some say 500 million years old. He said, I'm here to tell you that man only began to think about 3,500 years ago." And you're talking about Greece, really to think, and really in terms of logic and looking for the deep and real truth of everything, of the universe and of man.
Yeah. So we call it science, we call it logic. The Greeks use the word logos. I speak of this all the time. It's sort of the central declaration that I want to repeat, because it's the beginning of the Gospel of John. and it connects these first two roots of our faith: the Jewish prophetic, justice-oriented, holy-oriented God of the Jews, of the Hebrews, and then the logos-centered, oriented, focus on logic, on thought, on reason of the Greeks of Athens.
Faith and reason. Faith and reason.
Faith
Right.
and reason. Faith and reason.
Yep.
Faith and reason. Exactly. And the word logos, I've said this before, but I'll repeat. It means word. And that's why the Gospel of John, when it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was God. God is the Word. The word in Greek is logos. It says, in the beginning was the logos, and the logos was with God, and the logos was God. And that logos word, meaning logos word in Greek,
Robert, if you would get a good Greek dictionary,
okay,
and look up the word logos,
okay,
you would find. I did this once on a challenge. Somebody said, "Do it." I did it. There were 3.5 pages. 3.5 pages of definition for logos.
yeah,
Order,
yes,
word, order, reason.
reason,
It meant so many things. It meant so many things, and it was. I'll tell you. I read a book on just called Logos. What was it called? Logos something. The Rise of Logos. I think it was The Rise of Logos by Jones, and it was. I was so enthused after reading it that when I got to the gospel, you know that I offer the Tridentine Mass, right? I
yeah,
call it now the Apostolic Mass. I like that better because it lists all of the apostles in it, name by
yeah,
name. But at the end of the Apostolic Mass, the Tridentine Mass, is the last gospel, the Gospel of John. And I was so on fire with the idea of the logos. It's fantastic what it is, that I found myself unwittingly saying, in principio erat logos. when I came to the variable, in the beginning was the word. I looked right at it, and logos came out. It's absolutely full. Anybody who's got a little bit of time should look up logos. It's full meaning. It's fantastic.
I agree completely, and I appreciate everything you just said. It is completely in harmony with the sort of fundamental insight. Oh, Lady Rotha is joining. Good afternoon from the Isle of
From the
Man.
Isle of Man. Bravo, brava, Lady
We're always
Rotha.
happy to see you, Lady Rotha. And Lorraine Frechette, greetings from Massachusetts. My father was born in Haverhill, Massachusetts.
And she has to be one of those. Well, she has to be one of those great French families that came down from Vermont.
There were,
And
yes.
yep.
And then Dan Simpson is joining us from Prescott, Arizona. It's early in the morning out there. Thank you all for watching. And just this refocusing again on the logos, what Father just said, in Latin, the word for word is verbum. And so in the Latin Vulgate, when you celebrate the Latin Mass and you read the gospel, the last gospel at the end of the Mass, you say, in principio erat verbum, but you read it in principio erat logos.
Yes, yeah.
You were so, that's the Greek, and that word is in every word we have for biologos, biology, theologos, which is the meaning of God or the study of God.
And Robert, let's not forget logic.
Logic itself.
Logic itself is logos, right?
So what I'm saying and what you're saying is this connects with Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the logos.
Absolutely.
And if you're saying you can also treat the word as meaning, you could say in the beginning was the meaning, and the meaning was with God, and the meaning was God.
Yes.
And this, I like to think that even some person who's kind of trendy, maybe a hippie, if I were to say to such a person, the meaning of everything, or the meaning of all things is the logos, it might be attractive. It might be a kind of way to begin to draw people toward Christ because he's the meaning.
Yes.
So,
And John's gospel, of course, that comes from the Gospel of St. John, is written in Greek, right? Because he's reaching to out a little bit outside of the.
oh, we're getting the logos here on the screen.
Here we are. Logos, order, word, reason, logic. Yes.
It indicates a rational explanation in contrast to a mythological explanation. Among Greek philosophers, the first philosopher who used the term is Heraclitus. By using the term logos, he meant the principle of the cosmos that organizes and orders the world, that had the power to regulate the birth and decay of things in the world. The cosmos was, as he saw it, constantly changing, and he conceived logos as the organizing principle of change. In the context of ancient Greek philosophy, logos was a divine principle which transcended the world of mortals.
Now, just up to now, right up to now, everything you read, Robert, of this definition, this overview, can be easily applied to Jesus Christ.
Well, in fact, John does that in this passage, which is the beginning of the Gospel of John. Those are the very first words. He starts imitating the book of Genesis. He starts, in the beginning was, just as Genesis begins. And he says was the logos, the divine principle, but then he's at pains to say that that divine principle was not just an abstract thing, but it became man. It became incarnate. It became visible to us. It became filled with heart and love and joy and sacrifice. It became Jesus Christ. Right?
Absolutely. All of that you just mentioned, all of that and infinitely more became man. Became man in the person of Jesus Christ. Fantastic. When we talk about the incarnation, oftentimes so quickly, we lose its meaning. It doesn't mean that much. It's unbelievably profound that God, the Logos, became man is unbelievable. It is. It's as a matter of fact, it's a stumbling block for many still today.
Well, the deepest things have to be faith, hope, love, have to be love. Love requires person, and a person seeks meaning. In other words, you're a person, and you're not just Father Murr, a certain number of atoms, a certain time period of history. You're actually a unique soul, and these teachings are the reason why Christianity defends the dignity of the person as the very first principle. We don't quickly and should not quickly execute and torture people. We respect people. We honor their dignity as image and likeness of God. And we know that our journey is to be conformed to Christ, be conformed to a kind of perfect logos, perfect reason.
This is why we have, as one of the commandments, love of neighbor, right?
Yeah.
And as my mother pointed out to me many times in life, she said, love is not the same thing as like. That's why you can love your enemy and not like him.
Absolutely, yeah. Right? I don't like you, but I love you.
There you go. There you go.
Well,
actually, my mother put it better, Robert. I thought it was brilliant. She said one time to me in an aside, well, actually not to me, I heard it. She was telling somebody else. She said, I have 7 children. I love them all. 2 of them I like. Anyway.
There's a lot to be said for having a kind of oscillation or interchange between those two concepts. Um, we live in a world where there is a lot of liking and a lot of attraction and a lot of things that are appealing to our senses, and we deal with those things, and we
I'm just saying that a lot of people, for example, a lot of people poo-hoo Christianity because they're saying that's the most ridiculous thing. I've heard this. People have told me it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, that I have to love my enemies. You can't love your enemies. Up, 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 up. Well, they're confusing loving with liking. Yes, you can love. If what does love mean? It means respect. It means respect. Respecting somebody for. Let me just turn off my phone. I'll get that later. I'm sorry.
well,
It means.
I like this one. It's actually very real when that happens. Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, yeah, it brings us back to reality, right? We're talking about all these lofty ideals, but yes, you can love your enemy. You can love your enemy if look, one of the saints, and I wish for the life of me I could remember. I can't remember who it was, but one of the saints actually said this: the real mortal sin is not returning someone's salutation. And you think, what kind of a ridiculous statement is that? And he said, no, when somebody says good morning to you and addresses you, they're acknowledging your existence, and not to answer back, not to respond to that, is to not recognize his or her existence. And that's he said that's absolutely a sin, right? Well, that's the whole thing of love. This is love, respect, honor, for the very fact of being human, of having a human nature. And this is what Christ is saying. You must love everyone. You must love your neighbors, and you must love your enemies. And you can love them if that means respect. Again, you do not have to like them. All right. That's a different thing that goes into simpatia, being simpatico. You don't need that. That's not what's required. Respect for his or her existence is very important, and that's what Christ is talking about.
Well, you're bringing us to a high level, and I think that's the purpose also of this conversation, to talk about the fall of Constantinople. It may seem an odd thing, but in a way, if we look at it as this three bases of our faith: Israel, that is Jerusalem, the city, which is the prophetic and the holy presence of God and the mystery of God in the burning bush, the bush that is burned but not consumed, the presence in reality of a transcendent, of something that desires to be in contact with us human beings. And then we talk about Athens and the Greek. Kathy Pearson says, you two are the best.
Well, finally, someone recognizes it, Robert.
Kathy, I know Kathy Pearson, and I appreciate that, Kathy, but we are simply other pilgrims like yourself, and we are given anything that Anthony Sanchez, hello from Rhode Island. Actually, I'm descended from Roger Williams, who founded Rhode Island.
Is that right?
Yeah. My mother was from an old New England family back to the Pilgrims' time.
Wow.
My father was from Southern Ireland. Okay, so my intent is to bring together in the discussion of Constantinople and of these three sources of the faith: Jerusalem, the logic and wisdom and mathematical focus and intellectual focus of Athens, of the great philosophers. And then there's a third city, if we could have the map up. It's Rome, where the Roman Catholic Church, where the church that derived from Peter and Paul coming to Rome, both of them coming from Israel, from Jerusalem, coming to Rome and dying in Rome. That's why it's the Roman Catholic Church, the witness of the first two leaders of the church, came to its apotheosis, to its conclusion, to its end, to its death, and then its continuation in the followers of those two men in Rome. And there is the triple sort of legacy or heritage of the Roman Catholic Church in Jerusalem, in Athens, and in Rome.
Robert, if I may just interject here for a moment, there are also, and this is an important ecclesiological observation. There are 4 patriarchal sees: Jerusalem, Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome.
Well,
Right?
I think we say there's a 5th one as well, Constantinople.
Founded by whom? Founded by whom?
Constantine. But those.
Wait a minute. You've got those patriarchal cities were founded by one of the apostles.
Yeah, you're right.
As first bishop. And this is the problem. For example, later on when we have the letter, we have Pope Clement of Rome.
Yes.
Writing to Constantinople, instructing Constantinople on a particular matter. Right? It doesn't matter what it was. But the whole point was that Rome felt that it had that place to do so because it was the city of St. Peter and St. Paul. Right, yeah. Founded by those apostles. Constantinople, for as important as it was, civilly and religiously, there's no question of it, is not one of the 4 original patriarchal cities. Okay.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Just a distinction to make.
No, it's 300 years later.
Yeah.
And you could legitimately say that Peter is also the first bishop of Jerusalem and also the first bishop of Antioch.
Well, he's the first bishop of Antioch, and James is the first bishop of Jerusalem. Okay.
Yeah, that's
and yes, but but when it comes down to later on, centuries later, when it comes down to papal authority over the other patriarchies, it's Rome that wins out, and this is all. It's also a sore point between the Eastern Church and the Western Church. All right, and I don't mean to bring it up for division, just for clarification. That's all.
Okay. Yeah. Well, one important point that's been useful to me, I'd like to share, is this Mediterranean. What's the meaning of that word? Medi is in the middle. Terra refers to earth.
Mm-hmm.
So Terra is in the middle of the world, in the middle of the earth, in the middle of the lands around the sea. The Mediterranean Sea gets its name from the fact that it's in the middle of the lands that were the world at that time that was known. Below that black line, you're heading into the Sahara Desert,
mm-hmm.
which I've also visited when I was a young man. And that's where the Tiberine monks and Father Charles de Foucault lived. The area above the black line was barbaric in the most fundamental sense. They didn't have reading and writing until the Christianizing centuries, first in the 400s and 500s with the apostles and missionaries to the Goths and the Germans, and then Boniface, and then finally Cyril and Methodius. They went north of that black line, and they converted and they gave writing. They made the alphabet for the Slavic peoples. It's the Cyrillic alphabet because Kirill drew it up. Cyril and Methodius were 2 brothers who went above that black line, and that world was forests, was wild animals, and was savages who didn't read and write. And it was those centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire there. Rome on the left fell in 476. AD, the last Roman emperor in the West. And after that, you're already beginning the creation of the European nations. The king of the Franks, Clovis. There's starting to be the rudiments of Spain with the Vandals. And the king of the Germans would slowly be the Angles, the Saxons, all those people and tribes up there eventually become, and then as they come in from the steppes of Asia and they come across as wandering tribes, particularly the Huns, they took Hungaria, which is right there on that blue line. Above the black line, you'll see that blue line. That's the Danube River that comes across Europe from the Swiss Alps and goes all the way to the Black Sea, the Great Danube. And in the middle, where that line more or less curves moves to the south, is the area where it is the center of Hungary. The Hungarians came and finally settled there. Then you see the Avars, the Slavs, the Bulgars. The Bulgars become Bulgaria. So
and may I say this too? Jump in here.
Sure.
The Slavs, for those who think that slavery began with the bringing Africans over to the United States of America, slavery is part of every culture on earth that we knew of. And as a matter of fact, it was the English and the Americans who ceased slavery. But the Slavs are called Slavs because it means slaves.
Yeah.
And the Romans considered the best slaves to come from that area, which is Poland, the Slavic, we call the Slavic nations,
Yeah.
right? But these are all, you're absolutely right. These are all barbarians from there. Yeah. Let me just point one other thing out that I was impacted by when I read this about writing. The power of the word. We go back to logos, the power of the word, right? When the Jesuit missionaries came over to what is today Canada and the United States, one of the first instruments that they presented to the natives was writing. Right? Now, you and I understand what writing, we've read all of our lives, we both write, right? However, to the natives, or the Indians, as they were called, right? What one of the Jesuits did was this. He sent a Jesuit confrere, 150 feet away. And he said to a group of Indians here, he said, "What shall I tell him to do?" What do you mean, what should you tell him? What do you want him to do? He's 150 feet away. What shall I? Well, tell him to turn around 3 times and jump once. And the other Jesuit took a piece of parchment and wrote, "Turn around 3 times and jump in the air once." He gave it to him in writing, and he said to the Indian, "Take that to him."
Yeah.
Which he did. The other Jesuit priest turned around 3 times and jumped once. Whoa! This was like magic. Nobody had ever seen that kind of communication. How powerful that was. So immediately people wanted to know how to read and to write. And they learned the basics. I mean, this is power. This is power. It was fantastic.
Don Carlo, I had not heard that story, and you did not tell it to me before this program. And I honor you with making it very clear that invention of writing was a combination of the internet and artificial intelligence put together and created all of the culture of our world, the world that we know as the civilized world. And that's why when we go to the ancient excavations and we find a few bricks or a few parchments, and we try to decipher them, we recognize that we are in touch with the life and the hope and the joy and the sorrow of the people of that time. And writing is a transfer through time and space of human experience, and it was the fundamental human discovery.
And powerful. Powerful, right? And you, when you stop to think of it, Robert, just it's banal almost, right? Because we do this all the time. But when you stop to think that when you're reading about the four causes of Aristotle's four causes, you're reading the mind of Aristotle. This is
Yes,
outside of space and time. You're
yes.
reading another man's thoughts, his inner thoughts. I mean, this is why we go back again to logos, why it's so important, because it's so fantastically dynamic. It's so dynamic, right? Anyway.
Yes. Well, this connects up with our topic for today, which really drew on a coincidence that yesterday was the day that Constantinople fell. And Constantinople, and then as I reflected on that, I thought it was worthy of discussion. And I still feel so after this half hour where we haven't even really gotten to the fall of Constantinople. But it is a turning point. And I'll just briefly give the history. The city was captured on the 29th of May, 1453. Now, also, I'm going to say that in 1453, or about that year, the printing press was discovered in Germany. Who was that? The Gutenberg
Yeah.
printer, right about that year, started to print.
And the first thing that he printed was
I think it was
the Catholic Bible.
Yeah. So what I really, really want to get across in this conversation is 1453 is a turning point in history, both because of the printing press, which then spreads these words in a way that you've been referring to as powerful things in a way that was impossible prior to that time, because a monk would take his scroll, a sheep's skin, and copy something on it a day, a night, a week, a month, a year, and he'd finish with one book. A printing press, once it placed all the letters there and started to move, would do 1,000 books in a week, and then many more. So the explosion of knowledge, which you connected also with power, this explains the rise of Europe to a preeminence in the world. Why, for the last 500 and so years, the world was sort of dominated by Europe. This explains it. But this 29th of May, 1453 fall of Byzantium also explains it. And I'm going to say why. It was a 53-day siege. The city had been reduced to a kind of series of small villages inside very powerful walls. They had created those walls to defend against any possible enemy. However, the Turks had managed to gain a new technology called the cannon. These fortifications, the history books tell us, were overcome with the use of gunpowder, specifically from Ottoman cannons and bombards heralding a change in sea warfare. The Ottoman cannons repeatedly fired massive cannonballs weighing 1,000 pounds or more over about a mile or 2 miles of distance. These cannonballs created gaps in the Theodosian walls for the Ottoman siege and eventually broke the walls and allowed. They were only defended by about 10,000 men inside the walls. The Ottomans had 50,000 men outside the walls, and they came in and captured Byzantium. Byzantium fell. However, it had been in decline for many years prior to that. And in those years, some of the leading intellectuals saw that the city might not hold, although the actual fall was psychologically astonishing for the Byzantines of that time. But these scholars and thoughtful people said maybe we should have an escape place, and they started to leave Byzantium already in the 1440s and into the 50s. But by the time the early 1453, many were fleeing, and they would take a trunk of manuscripts with them. They would leave with the manuscripts containing the writings of Aristotle, of Plato. Socrates never wrote anything, but they wrote about Socrates. The other Greek philosophers, the works of Galen on medicine, the works of the Hippocratic writings by Hippocrates, which were the basis of the principles of the moral principles of medical care, and so many mathematical, Euclid, etc. And they carried these works with them on ships to Venice, to Rome, to Naples, to Florence, to Milan, and to other places. This is why, conclusion of the story, there was an explosion of intellectual study and culture in Italy in particular, but throughout Europe, Western Europe, due to the arrival from Byzantium of these scholars with their writings. And we call that the Renaissance.
That's right. That's right. Were it not for that, we wouldn't have the Renaissance, or it wouldn't have been as powerful and an epic in human history as it was. Yes.
Right. And therefore, we lament in some ways the end of Byzantium, founded officially in 330 and in 1453, yesterday, being taken over. It still exists, of course, as Istanbul. But there was the first consequence, the renewal of learning in Italy and in the West, which we call the Renaissance, which comes from, of course, the French, renaissance, rebirth of classical culture. And this is the explanation for the word Middle Ages. The medieval period is a period between two ages. It's the middle of two ages, the classical world and the modern world. The classical culture of Greece and Rome, and also Israel, and the modern world where it's been renewed, reborn with science, with technology from that world. And the interesting question is whether we are still in that world or we are now in some way in the post so-called modern world, or the post-Christian world, the post-Christian culture. But looking back,
there's one thing that there's one parallel, Robert, that I think could be rediscovered: reading and writing. I'm surprised at how many people no longer read and no longer write. As a matter of fact, I was just in one school in California that prided itself on the fact that it was the only school in the whole region that taught cursive writing. Nobody knows how to do that any longer.
mm-hmm.
If they write, it's on computer or in block letters. They have no idea of cursive writing. And reading has gone way down also.
Absolutely.
It really has. It really has. We might be living in the time where it's rediscovered for some reason. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, Father Murr, the one who announced and issued the call to rediscover cursive writing and reading. I think it would be good. Saint Augustine, and this helped me a lot in my years of trying to write. He said, I learn by writing. Now, what this means is you write a sentence and you say, well, that's not what I meant to say. I've got to add something or explain something. Right. And then you go in one direction, say, I'm leaving out all of this that I have in my mind to say. I have to put that in. The very process of writing teaches you.
Absolutely. And it disciplines your mind.
Yeah.
You know, I'll tell you something that's funny. And it occurred to me when I was about 20, 25, I guess. I all of a sudden, in conversation with different people, by the way they spoke, I could tell who read and who did not read.
Mm-hmm.
By their vocabulary, the way they spoke, the way they formed sentences, you could tell a reader from a non-reader. Verbally, orally. It's kind of an amazing thing. Yeah. But it's being lost, and that's a shame because it really is a way to organize the mind.
Well, I think we should issue that call right now. that we reaffirm that reading and writing do orient the mind, deepen the mind, and would help us instead of just videos over and over.
Robert, I'll go one step further. Let me make a formal call to all those listening to subscribe to Inside the Vatican. That's a great way to start reading and you can and writing. There's place for comments, right?
Yeah.
For both. There you go.
Well,
And
thank
that
you.
commercial, Robert, comes to you free. I'll not charge you for that.
Okay, and then I'm going to announce something new. We are thinking of gathering a small group of a dozen people and visiting Father Murr for a retreat. And I'd like to know if anyone would be interested in that. We will not announce the location, but it will be wonderful. So I would like to wrap this up in a way. I would say a few more minutes here. The other points and the reasons I wanted to recall Byzantium, Constantinople. The first point really is the West tends to underestimate or forget completely about the existence of Byzantium.
That's right.
I always want to remind the West that Rome continued for more than 1,000 years from its burning in 410 AD by Alaric, when St. Jerome and St. Augustine said the whole world is groaning and in lament that Rome is burnt. Byzantium was continuing for another 1,000 years, and that was Roman culture, and that was Christian faith as well.
And saved, as you brought up before, Byzantium saved so much of Greek classical culture, knowledge, writing, script, everything.
Okay.
Yes.
So I want to honor Byzantium. Then I want to also say there was an event, there was one other time when Byzantium fell. And that was in 1204 to the Venetians, who were supposed to go to the Palestine and the Holy Land and wage a crusade against the Muslims and try to take back the Holy Land and assist the other European powers, Christian powers. And instead they said, well, there's no money down there, so let's go to Byzantium, take Byzantium and take their gold and silver and get rich. And they did so, and they did it in a bloody way in 1204. This has never been forgotten by the Eastern world of orthodoxy. And this is the third point. The division between the Catholic and the Orthodox churches is a tragedy. I've made it a kind of central point for my work and understanding. I'm trying to overcome the tragic split between East and West, because I think we should be together. And John Paul II.
There's no question that we should be together. There's no question of it. I would love to see this happen in my lifetime. And it better, anybody who's listening and has any responsibility in the matter better hurry. Well, I'm getting old real quick, but I'd love to see this.
Yeah.
I'd love to see.
So this split dates from 1054, and there's many explanations for it, but a profound reason was a human misunderstanding and human sort of, rivalry. And we could kind of stitch together and undo if we patiently worked at it, but we would have to forgive each other in a way. John Paul II always said the church should breathe with two lungs. Each lung should breathe. Mm-hmm. And in the East, we have the Greek tradition, the tradition of Byzantium. In the West, we have the Latin tradition, the tradition of Rome. These were two Romes. It was the old Rome and the new Rome. And the new Rome fell in 1453, yesterday, 570 years ago. And nevertheless, Christianity continued in the East in different centers, in the Lebanon, in Alexandria, among the Copts, and it continued in particular among the Slavs. And the The Poles became Catholic, but the Russians and people in the other Eastern countries like Bulgaria and Romania, they became Orthodox. They went with their leaders who had split with Rome. And this wound is a profound wound, and I think it contributes even to these present terrible consequences of this war we are watching. So I feel to study Byzantium, to lament the fall of Byzantium yesterday, 570 years ago, and to consider a deeper study of this history is a work of ecumenism or of Christian unity. And I'd like that to proceed forward until we can create the framework for a full reunion between the Catholics and the Orthodox.
Wouldn't it be marvelous? Wouldn't that be marvelous, really?
And the final reflection that I had was the Eastern liturgy, the Byzantine liturgy.
I was just going to say that, especially for people, Robert, especially for people who are upset with the Novus Ordo in the Latin Church.
Absolutely.
The Byzantine or Eastern liturgy is absolutely magnificent. Absolutely magnificent.
Right. And it's magnificent because it's focused on Christ and focused on the divine. The real objection that people have to the Novus Ordo is that, for perhaps good intentions, in the 1960s at the Second Vatican Council, and then after with the Committee to Reform the Liturgy, there was a desire to be kind of modern and humanistic and oriented toward the reform of class structures and helping the poor and shaking hands with one's brother in the church. All of these factors tended to explain why Trinitarian phrases referring to the awesomeness and holiness of God were slightly reduced, because it was a more man-focused, more human improvement liturgy drawn from the old Latin Rite, but somehow transformed in the 1960s. And that changed the attitude of millions of people who felt somehow less drawn towards Almighty God in this liturgy, and they stopped going to Mass. This is part of the reason for the ecclesial crisis in the West. And churches
only in the United States and Canada, only 75% stopped going. That's all.
Okay, so I'm not making any type of argument myself here on any theological point. I'm making an observation, even from the point of a simple journalist, saying, I observe a culture where 75% of the people in the culture radically change their behavior due to a liturgical change. Why did they do it? My explanation is that they found less of a draw toward the eternal Father and toward the sacrifice of his eternal Son in the new liturgy, because it was more humanistic. Therefore, there was a reason why Pope Benedict wished to continue to have both liturgies, and therefore, when you attend a Byzantine liturgy, a liturgy that derives from John Chrysostom, St. John Chrysostom, the Archbishop of Constantinople in the early 400s. So he was 1600 years ago. He wrote what's called the Byzantine liturgy, or the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, which is what to do in order to praise God in remembrance of Christ and his sacrifice. That's what the Mass is. And he said, do this in memory of me, because it was what he did at the Last Supper. It's what he experienced on Golgotha, dying, and it's about his resurrection. It's going back to remember what happened to Christ and keeping him at the center. That liturgy is still part of the Catholic Church, because the Maronites, the Ukrainian Greek Catholics, and others still celebrate, because they came from a tradition which in the Greek world from 400 to 1054 was using that liturgy completely acceptable to Rome, utterly united with Rome, no separation from Rome. But once there was a break between the Orthodox and the Catholics in 1054, in the West, it wasn't that we objected to their liturgy, but they were excommunicated in any case because of the Great Schism, which I lament daily. So I think the recovery of the East and the West, and the East, of course, has its own doubts about the West, may not want to recover a West that's become so sort of modernistic.
Well, they're also, you're right, Robert. You're hitting on something that's very important. I think it's really at the heart of the matter. There are trust issues. And stemming from what? Stemming from the last crusade that ended terribly, and also the fall of Byzantium.
Yeah.
With no outside help that might have come in to save the day.
Yeah, actually, all during 1451 and 52, the Emperor of Byzantium was calling to the West, say, please send me a few troops because I may face final defeat. And very few troops came to help.
That's right.
Okay, so I connect all of this even with the present war in Ukraine and with what happened to Russia, which was the largest of all the Orthodox populations. They had over 100 million Orthodox in Russia. And in 1917, they were all, by governmental decree, told that their religion was prohibited. And so I lament these things. I'm not even making an analysis of them. I lament the division of the Christian church in 1054. I lament the fall of Constantinople, Byzantium, in 1453, yesterday, May 29th.
Yep.
And I lament these continuing centuries of division, and I lament the coming of communism and official atheism and the destruction of Christianity in 1917. And for these reasons, I pray for the overcoming of these divisions and the return of faith and the return of respect for other human beings and love for other human beings in the coming years.
Amen.
All right.
Amen, I say. Yes.
You think that's a good agenda?
I think that's a perfect way to end the program, because that's exactly it. Wouldn't it be marvelous if we were all together again, and the strength that we would draw from each other, and as a one mystical body of Christ, rather than pieces of that body all over the place, strewn, if you will, all over the place. Oneness again, a unity, and a strength of purpose in a world that really needs to see unity. They can debunk everything else, but when they see Christians loving one another, they can't debunk that. They can't do that. It's too obvious. And this would be a marvelous way to love one another, to forgive past hurts and past confusions and past misinterpretations and everything else, and getting back to together. It would be fantastic.
We have Edward W. writing as a listener. Amazing how so, quote, Christians, unquote, would rather stay under their political leaders than be united under Peter as our Lord wanted. Now that's quite a...
Yeah, got a point. He's got a point.
And then Ben Thorpe, aka Abel, well, we'll have to understand that more deeply on another occasion. The Orthodox recognize that the sack of Constantinople was a tragic mistake on both sides. Well, that's very kind of them. I'm glad that's happened.
Yes. Step in the right direction, don't you think?
Yeah. That's referring to the Venetians in 1204. Well, Father Murr, it's wonderful to talk with you. It's the highlight of my week. Lady Rotha, Logos is Rising. Yeah.
Logos is Rising. That's the book I read. That's right. A fabulous book. It set me on fire for the idea of Logos. I mean, we studied this in theology and everything else, but before I read that book, it really didn't come alive as much. And
we can continue this discussion and try to go more deeply. Of course, recent popes and many theologians have explored this, and it does take us more deeply into the truth.
Absolutely.
So,
Well, Saeed, what do you say? We're at the end of our hour.
yes, we are.
Good.
Farewell,
I
Father.
don't mean good. I mean good.
Yes. Farewell, everyone.
Thank you, Robert. God bless.
Thank you.